let's start with the Blazers because this this is a weird team. This is the team you
Very.
requested to talk about. Like when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to talk about this week, it started with the Blazers because you just really wanted to talk about them. And I was like, okay, like let's do the like, what the fuck is going on with them teams, right? And the Blazers kind of stand out to me in that regard. So I'll just give you the floor. I know you were super excited about talking about the Blazers, and I just want to allow you that space to do so.
Well, first of all, I appreciate it. I badgered a friend of mine, Mike Richmond, and letting me on Locked On Blazers to do the same because I just have so many thoughts about this team. Like we talked about last week, I think Dame's been legit All NBA worthy this year.
Yeah.
Even when he's fought through injury, I think there have been times where he's been a little bit deferential because you can tell that he's been bothered at points. But now, he's still out right now. I think he's coming back in a day or two, hopefully. But point being, this team is it's odd to talk about a 19-21 team and say that I feel like somewhat optimistic about them, not necessarily in like title contention status or anything like that. But they're just fascinating to look at because this is one of the few teams that I felt like I couldn't really peg down what they were headed into the year. Because I didn't know what Dame was going to look like coming off of the abdominal injury last year. I wasn't sure what he would look like this season. I thought maybe he was a real regression candidate, getting older, coming off an injury. That's been the opposite. And he's done a ton of heavy lifting for them. And what's been fun too, like there are a ton of enticing things going on with the roster. Like I think Anthony Simons has taken maybe not taken a step, but I think you're continuing to see his growth and evolution and as the secondary shot maker and scorer alongside Dame.
Yep.
Which considering like it feels like it was for a long period last year, but that really only happened on his own for about 20 games. So seeing that in a continued stretch has been nice to see. But then outside that, I think, Jeremy Grant's played like a borderline all-star this year. There
Yes.
really hasn't been any dip from him. He's been fantastic as a shooter. The face-up and post stuff has been legit. I think his defense hasn't been all defense level, but it's still been pretty good. And there's just so much to dive into with this team because I think a mutual friend of ours, Nikias Duncan, wrote a really great article recently, I think just after Christmas, about how Dame is being used as this fantastic off-ball scoring threat. And while that's been the case and it's been awesome to see, I actually think that they don't lean into Dame enough, which is odd. But it's also part of their
Especially,
roster.
yeah, like the interesting thing is like they're not leaning into Dame as much in this season of heliocentric superstar like performances, right? Like it feels like Dame, for the fact that he's averaging 27 points a game and has been absolutely terrific, it feels like he hasn't had that big explosion. Like he had 41 in 2 out of the first 3 games this season. And I think he has one other 40-point game against Denver in a game they lost by 1 back in December. But like we haven't had that like that enormous Damian Lillard game, it feels like yet. And he's been the guy that's like almost been synonymous with that over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, it feels like, or at least a guy that's been synonymous with that. So for him not to have that yet in this season of, Donovan Mitchell going for 71 and Luka Doncic breaking the scale and, Nikola Jokic going even further than breaking the scale and, Kevin Durant going nuts just across the board. We've had so many great games. It's weird that he hasn't had one. And I do think that it goes back to exactly what you're saying in terms of they are playing him a little bit more off the ball, whereas these guys that have been going off have been a little bit more empowered on the ball, maybe is the way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's kind of a difficult balance there because I think on one hand, like I was just thinking about this the other day and I was like, oh, I wish that they'd really lean into more of him doing pick and roll. And I was like, well, why don't they? And I think a part of it is they really need to get the most out of Nurk by using him as a high post facilitator and a DHO guy. So I think we've seen less of that. But also, I think it's difficult because they've had to use multiple handlers and getting more creative with the offense. And even though it feels like it's for the worst, and I think sometimes it is, how would you rate this as a shooting team?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, look, they're shooting the shit out of it this year. Just, Anthony Simons shooting 38, Jeremy Grant's shooting 42, Damian Lillard is like just an unconscious shooter. But other than those guys, they don't really have anyone else. Like
Exactly.
Yusuf Nurkic is like an occasional shooter, I guess, who makes them, but doesn't shoot it enough volume. Josh Hart doesn't really take them. I guess Shaden Sharp like kind of takes them sometimes, but it feels like teams are like fairly comfortable to let that happen, right?
Yeah.
Like if he's the one shooting, all due respect to Shaden Sharp, I think that teams are like, okay, this is probably a win for us on this possession, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's in a tough spot because, like you just mentioned, like, okay, so Ant and Dame are combining for 21 threes a night. That's a lot. They shoot the ball incredibly well. It's entirely, like, so much of it is pull-up shooting and stuff off movement, too. Jeremy Grant has been electric as a shooter this season. But then you pull outside that, okay, Josh Hart is taking 2 threes a game, below average. And even, like, recently, like, he's just not even shooting them. He's passing up wide open stuff. He's not getting closed out to. And you go up and down the roster, and all of their wings are just guys who are pretty hesitant shooters or guys who are not going to get closed out to. And part of the issue, too, with Shaden right now, and not even an issue, like he's a rookie, it's stuff I want to see improve. He really likes to do 1 or 2 dribble side steps or get into a 20-foot pull-up instead of attack. Like I clipped this the other day, but he'll get a wide open look, and his shot prep isn't there yet. He's just more comfortable getting into, going straight up with something. I mean, being able to isolate a little bit.
And that's something I talked about earlier this week on Twitter. Like, I think Magic fans are frustrated that Cole Anthony hasn't yet taken a jump as a catch and shoot guy. Cole Anthony's a player that even in the NBA to this point has had the ball in his hands throughout his entire career. And then you go back to North Carolina, you go back to his high school tape, particularly, he never had to catch and shoot, right? It's not his natural inclination to just catch and fire and like be ready to catch and fire off the just hop, right?
Yeah.
It takes more time for these guys that have had that kind of development throughout the course of their careers to learn those catch and shoot footworks, mechanics, even just like the tendencies to break the tendencies. I think when your first instinct is to drive, then what I think people give it credit for. Mm-hmm. Like everyone just thinks, oh, if you can shoot pull-ups, you can probably shoot off the catch. Honestly, I think that's probably true that you can learn it, but I don't think necessarily that it's the quickest thing to develop necessarily.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that entirely. And I think it's just going to take time. Like, I think Shaden's going to be great with that in a couple of years, but right now, like, I think that can be a hindrance to their offense. And that's the biggest, again, not problem / issue, but like just watching the Blazers play, they get a ton of gravity out of what Dame and Anthony are doing off the ball. But the second you remove Jeremy Grant from the equation, or you remove just one of them from the equation, their lineups really crater offensively. And that bears out in watching and also just going through lineup data. Just think about it. Okay, if you have Jeremy Grant on the bench and you have Dame, Simons, Nurk, Josh Hart, and like even if you have Sharp out there, okay, Sharp is not getting hard closeouts right now for the most part. Josh Hart's being completely sagged off. Nurk, most of the time, guys aren't even coming up to meet him at the level. It just depends where it's at with that.
That's the guy we need to talk about, I think.
Well, yeah, at some point we're going to talk about him in a sec. But like, point being, like, okay, teams have been comfortable and have routinely just been loading up with guys having 1 foot in the paint on the entire weak side because of what the off-ball spacing situation can be for them. So that makes it difficult. And especially, too, like they have a lot of guys who are quality secondary playmakers, but without the shooting, it's a lot harder to get it more out of it. So I think this can go into talking about Nurk now. I guess, how would you rate Nurk's season?
Bad.
Yeah.
No.
I think
not
so.
Good.
He's in a hard spot because, like, I don't think that Nurk is a bad player, but I think for what the Blazers need and what Chauncey Billups likes to do, what this roster is gearing towards, Nurk is not a good fit. Like, I
think that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, I really like the leaning into what they've done with trying to with running Dame off screens more and just being a more like a high post oriented offense. But also at the same time, I genuinely question if they do that if they didn't have Nurk, which like, yeah, of course, like if you have a different player, you're going to incorporate different skill sets. But I think that this team would just be so much better or more dynamic offensively and better spaced if they were able to just be a more dynamic pick and roll team, because Nurk, even though like you can look at all the shooting splits, like it looks good, but he's still not finishing that well at the rim. The actual pick and roll impact isn't huge from him. I think like obviously the short roll stuff can be good, but I don't think it's anything incredibly amazing from him. And more so too, like they've been more willing to camp him out above the 3-point line than have him roam near the dunker spot. And I do wonder if that's something that maybe they start to change up. But like, again, like it's nice that he's shooting 40% on twos, but the problem is, okay, the defense doesn't care. Like it's great if the shot falls, but it's not on super high volume outside of a couple of outlier games. And if the shot, like, again, it's a process thing. And I think overall this isn't making a huge impact on the offense. And I mean, the defense too is where it's hard, because like I was thinking about this yesterday, and they love to run multiple coverages. Part of that is, the roster that they have. Like they have a ton of guys who are quick, and they are honestly pretty small now with Nasir Little and Justice Winslow both out still, and that's definitely hurt them on the defensive end. Particularly like watching the Portland game, like they got pretty bodied by what Orlando could do, just by the sheer volume of size that they had on the court. But I think I look at this and it's tough, because I don't like Nurk is okay if you put him in a deep drop, but he's not a very good rim protector. Right. I don't think his help, like he can have okay help instincts, but he just has such little lift, particularly off his back foot. So that inherently limits a ton of what he can do as a rim protector. They'll play him close to the level. They'll try and hedge and recover with him sometimes. I think that there's like some value in him being big and okay mobility wise compared to other guys who are 6'11". But for what the actual return is, I think that it generally just tends to be more of, we have to play this way because we have Jusuf Nurkic, rather than we're playing this way because this makes us better. And I think that's just it. To me, if there's going to be a significant improvement on this roster, I do think it comes through moving off of Nurk, and not even necessarily getting a better center, but getting somebody who gives you a more direct path, or something that's more streamlined per se, or easier to incorporate into what they're doing.
I'm glad you bring up the idea of streamlined, right? So overall this year, the Blazers are a +6 when Damian Lillard is on the court. When Lillard is on the court with Nurkic, they're only a +1. When Jusuf Nurkic is off and Damian Lillard is on, they're a +8.3, which is like a terrific basketball team. And then when it's Drew Eubanks and Damian Lillard on the court, they're actually a +10.3 in 360 minutes so far this season, which says to me that it's not necessarily about Drew Eubanks being like, some incredible center, although I think he's absolutely proven himself as like being a genuine NBA player, really effective backup center. It's more, I think, that what happens when Eubanks is out there is just simpler stuff that allows the other Blazers out there to just not have Nurkic kind of taking up space and like having to be involved in the offense as much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think like just bringing a real lob threat is huge too. Like especially for a more dynamic pick and roll game. I think that's fantastic. Like I like you're mentioning, I think that he has some warts defensively. Like he's really solid at being the hedge and recover guy that they like. He's not a great drop defender. But again,
do you know like what they're averaging in terms of like points per 100 possessions when Drew Eubanks is out on the court?
I do not.
126.2 per 100 possessions, which says exactly what you're saying. Like Eubanks has that weird like short roll game and like the, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Floater, push shot kind of deal that he throws up. But then he's like a lob threat going toward the basket. Like there is just a lot there that he does that Nurkic doesn't do that I think is a better fit with this team.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's not even that we're saying that he needs to like, move Nurk so that Drew Eubanks can start. It's more like get somebody who's a similar idea so you can make what you're doing a little bit more like that, more replicable, more just more continuity through what you're doing. And like to be fair, like they try and run some of the high post stuff through Drew Eubanks, and it can be hit or miss for me. But
So can I bring up what my idea is then?
yeah,
I think this is the team that should try to convince the Spurs to part with Jakob Poeltl. Like I think he would help them quite substantially more so than other players. Like he's a terrific screener to get shooters like Anthony Simons and Damian Lillard free. He is a smart short roller that has that same little push shot that Eubanks does. He's a way better defender than Eubanks, just kind of across the board. Like I think that it would allow real continuity going from Poeltl to Eubanks, starter to bench units. And on top of that, he does provide just more of a threat as a roller at the end of the day, going all the way toward the rim. And it's just simpler. He's not going to have the ball in his hands as much. It's going to allow Dame, Simons, Jeremy Grant to rock a little bit more.
Yeah, I could be open to that. I think alongside that too, like the other thing is like just adding more shooting alongside what they have, like injecting that into the rotation with and it doesn't even have to be like good shooting. Like I think literally if you have guys who can spot up and lift, like I think that's really all that they need to add in their off-ball players right now, because they can just be that lacking in that sometimes. But I agree. I still am curious to see how willing the Spurs would be to part from Poeltl. But what's so tough with this Portland team, and why I want to talk about them, because part of the reason I didn't have expectations, like we mentioned, like I didn't expect Dame to be this good when you have a guy who is playing this well. And like, yes, they're 19 and 21, but they're also like 3.5, 4 games out of being a lock for the playoffs. Like the West has been a shit show down from the 5 seed to the 12 seed right now. And that's not that teams are bad. It's just like they're kind of going through it right now. And I think what's interesting with them, and this is not to be like completely derived with pessimism, but I mean, the team is shooting, I think Dame and Anthony are both shooting 30% from 3 since Christmas. Like that's going to change. The overall shooting of the team is going to just swing back because that's how it works. It's not always going to be them shooting the worst that anybody has in the history of the league. Like it's going to change. Like I'm not saying they're going to shoot 45% from deep next, but the offense will revert a little bit. So I think like, again, like I am pretty comfortable saying this is an above 500 basketball team at the end of the day. And when you have a guy like Dame who is playing as well as he is, we always have the conversation about Dame. I feel like this is the latest we've ever gone into a year without a Chris Haynes article dropping about Dame's status in Portland. And I just am curious to see what they do and how they approach that, because it felt like this was more of a rebuild in the offseason. And now I think, again, not that it's the same as the Pacers. It's definitely different, but like in terms of there are a couple directions this can go, and I think the trade deadline is going to be really important for them figuring that out.